Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. The US military says one of its refueling aircraft has crashed in western Iraq. The United States has temporarily allowed the purchase of Russian oil already at sea. And EU leaders are invited to the Brussels summit on the 19th and 20th of March to tackle global challenges. The United States military says one of its refueling aircraft has gone down in western Iraq during ongoing operations in the region. It comes in the middle of the ongoing war in Iran, and strikes both Israel and the US have exchanged in the Middle East. 4 confirmed dead in US military refueling plane crash in Iraq, US Central Command said on Friday.
The United States has confirmed that a military refueling aircraft has crashed in western Iraq during operations linked to the war against Iran. US Central Command says the aircraft was a Boeing KC-135 Stratotanker, a key refueling plane used to supply fuel to fighter jets and bombers during long-range combat missions. Officials say the crash occurred in what the military described as friendly airspace during Operation Epic Fury, the US campaign targeting Iran. 2 aircraft were involved in the incident, though only one went down while the second aircraft landed safely. The US military says the crash was not caused by hostile or friendly fire, and rescue operations are currently underway. It remains unclear whether there are casualties, but officials say at least 5 crew members were on board. Military analysts say the incident may have occurred during an aerial refueling operation, a complex maneuver that requires aircraft to fly only a few feet apart while fuel is transferred. The KC-135 plays a crucial role in combat missions, allowing fighter jets to remain airborne for extended periods. Meanwhile, missile interceptions lit up the night sky over Israel early Friday, as objects believed to be Iranian missiles were seen falling over Israeli territory. The conflict involving Iran, Israel and the United States has now entered its second week, leaving more than 2,000 people dead and disrupting the lives of millions across the region. The death toll continues to rise, with most casualties reported in Iran, while nearly 700 people have been killed in Lebanon as Israeli strikes target Hezbollah positions, forcing hundreds of thousands of residents to flee their homes.
US President Donald Trump said in a post on Truth Social that the United States is totally destroying what he called Iran's terrorist regime. Trump claimed Iran's military capabilities, including its Navy, Air Force, missiles and drones, were being decimated, adding that the country's leaders had been wiped from the face of the earth. The Israel-US war on Iran is nearly 2 weeks old, and the warring parties have intensified exchange of attacks and threats, with Iranian side strongly warning that it would retaliate any attacks on its energy infrastructure. Our Turaj Shiraliliu has more from Tehran.
Reporting from the nationwide Al-Quds Day rallies in Tehran, which have been held since 1979 Islamic Revolution to mark the last Friday of fasting month of Ramadan. As the US-Israel war against Iran is approaching its 3rd week, the conflicting parties have increased not only exchange of tit-for-tat attacks, but verbal threats as well. Iranian military and security officials issued stern warnings after US President Donald Trump's statement on likely strikes on the Islamic Republic's energy infrastructure. A spokesman for Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, Ebrahim Zulfaqari, warned that any small attack on Iran's energy facilities or ports would trigger a sweeping retaliatory response targeting oil and gas infrastructure across the region. In a statement read on state TV, he said, should such an aggression occur, all oil and gas infrastructure in the region linked to the US and its Western allies will be set ablaze. Also, Secretary of Supreme National Security Council Ali Larijani warned that the entire region could face a blackout within 30 minutes if Iran's power grid is attacked. In a strong reaction to Trump's threat of destroying Iran's power grid in 1 hour, Larijani wrote in an Arabic post on X, the entire region would be blacked out within half an hour. Meantime, Foreign Minister spokesman Ismail Baghai said on Thursday that US might resort to false flag attacks on its soil using copied Iranian drones after unconfirmed reports alleging that Iran wants to target California in retaliatory UAV strikes. Turaj Shiralilu reporting from Tehran for A News.
The United Nations says the latest fighting in the Middle East is forcing millions from their homes across several countries. The humanitarian impact is growing quickly, with the largest numbers reported inside Iran.
More than 4.1 million people have been forced from their homes across Afghanistan, Iran, Lebanon and Pakistan since the latest escalation in the Middle East began. The figures were released by the United Nations, citing data from the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. Officials say another 117,000 people have crossed borders seeking refuge in other countries. UN humanitarians warn the region already hosts some of the world's largest populations in need of assistance, and the current conflict risks worsening the situation. In Lebanon alone, government figures estimate more than 816,000 people have registered as displaced, including around 285,000 children. Over 125,000 people are staying in nearly 600 collective shelters. The UN says refugee families living in Iran, most of them Afghans, are also affected by the fighting.
And just on Iran alone, our colleagues at UNHCR is telling us that between 600,000 and 1 million Iranian households are now temporarily displaced inside their country as a result of the ongoing conflict. This is a preliminary assessment, and that adds up to about 3.2 million people. They said this figure is likely to continue to rise as hostilities persist, adding that, as you can imagine, it will just add yet another level of humanitarian needs.
The United Nations is urging all sides to de-escalate and respect international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians, aid workers and medical facilities.
Washington has issued a temporary waiver allowing countries to buy Russian oil already stranded at sea, as global energy markets remain under pressure from the conflict with Iran.
Oil prices eased in Asia after Washington issued a temporary waiver allowing countries to purchase Russian oil already stranded at sea. US officials say the measure is meant to stabilize global energy markets after the conflict with Iran disrupted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz and pushed oil prices above $100 a barrel. The 30-day license allows the delivery and sale of Russian crude loaded on vessels as of March 12th and remains valid until April 11th. Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev said the waiver could affect around 100 million barrels of Russian crude currently at sea. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the recent rise in oil prices was a short-term disruption and argued it would ultimately bring long-term economic benefits for the United States. The move may boost oil supply but could put Washington at odds with its allies over sanctions on Russia. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said after a call with G7 leaders that now was not the time to relax sanctions against Russia despite the energy crisis. The United States has also announced a release of 172 million barrels from its Strategic Petroleum Reserve as part of a broader International Energy Agency coordinated release of 400 million barrels. The agency says the conflict in the Middle East is already creating the biggest oil supply disruption in history.
A suspected attacker has died after a vehicle drove into a synagogue in Michigan. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has condemned the attack, posting on X, "Anti-Semitism knows no limits or boundaries."
On Thursday afternoon, a man drove a vehicle into a large synagogue in Michigan and was shot dead by security personnel, authorities say. The attack comes amid heightened security concerns around Jewish and Muslim places of worship, following escalating tensions in the Middle East. Officials have identified the suspect as 41-year-old Ayman Mohammed Ghazali, a naturalized US citizen born in Lebanon, who came to the United States in 2011. The incident unfolded while around 140 children were attending the synagogue's early childhood center. Security personnel confronted the driver, and authorities say the suspect was killed during the confrontation. The only reported injury was a member of the synagogue's security team who was struck by the vehicle and taken to hospital. Officials say the guard is expected to recover. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the attack, saying, "Anti-Semitism knows no limits," and thanked US President Donald Trump for his firm stance against anti-Semitic attacks in America. Temple Israel, with over 12,000 members, also runs a childcare center for babies as young as 6 weeks. The FBI says it is leading the investigation and treating the incident as a targeted act of violence against the Jewish community. Security has been increased since the Israel-Hamas war began in October 2023, amid rising anti-Semitism. In the past 2 weeks, following military operations in Iran, law enforcement has stayed in contact with local houses of worship. On Thursday, Michigan Jewish organizations boosted security, while police patrolled other sites in cities across the US. Increased protection at Jewish centers.
European Council President Antonio Costa has invited leaders of the 27 EU member states to a summit on the 19th and 20th of March in Brussels to address pressing global and regional challenges. The agenda includes the Middle East crisis, covering Iran, Lebanon, Gaza and the West Bank, and its economic and energy impacts on Europe. Leaders are expected to review EU defence readiness, migration policy, and the 2028-2034 long-term budget. Costa emphasised the need for coordinated action to protect citizens and companies while promoting de-escalation. A drone attack in northern Iraq has killed a French officer and wounded several soldiers in the Erbil region, according to the French military. 6 troops involved in counter-terrorism training were injured in the strike while supporting operations against the Islamic State. In a post on social media platform X, Emmanuel Macron condemning the attack and calling it unacceptable. He said Chief Warrant Officer Arnaud Frion died for France. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced a $25.7 billion plan to strengthen Canada's military in the Arctic and reduce reliance on the United States. The initiative will expand military airfields, build 4 support hubs, upgrade airports and improve roads connecting the Arctic to southern Canada. Currently, the region has 4 small airfields and around 2,000 soldiers. The announcement comes amid rising tensions with the US following tariffs and remarks about Canadian territory. Carney said the plan will also protect sovereignty and create new opportunities for northern communities.
With this plan, we are taking control of our future. We will no longer rely on others to defend our Arctic security or to fuel our economy. We're taking full responsibility for defending our sovereignty. And we are unleashing a range of new economic opportunities for the over 140,000 Northerners who will benefit from stronger, more connected communities, more opportunities, and a higher standard of living.
A passenger train from Pyongyang arrived in Beijing on Friday, marking the resumption of cross-border rail services as China seeks to strengthen ties with North Korea. Launched in 1954, the China-North Korea rail link had been suspended since January 2020. China's railway operator said resumed services connect Beijing and Dandong with Pyongyang, boosting travel and economic, trade and cultural exchanges. Beijing-Pyongyang trains will run 4 days a week, while Dandong-Pyongyang services will operate daily. The Rashtriya Swatantra Party has secured a major victory in Nepal's elections, winning 182 seats. This is the biggest win for a single party in the country in decades. RSP leader Bailendra Shah is set to become the country's next Prime Minister. The formation of the new government is expected to take at least a week. Last year's youth protests and political unrest influenced the election outcome. Former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli was defeated by Shah in Japa 5, while the new leader of the Nepali Congress, Kagan Thapa, also lost seats to RSP candidates. After the break, we turn to escalating tensions in the war involving Iran, after the country's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, signalled that Tehran could use the Strait of Hormuz as an economic weapon against its adversaries. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Iran's newly appointed supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has suggested that Tehran may use the Strait of Hormuz as an economic tool in its confrontation with the United States and Israel. The strategic waterway carries a significant share of the world's oil supply, and any disruption there could have major implications for global energy markets. Khamenei has said Iran intends to put pressure on its adversaries by driving up oil prices, while US President Donald Trump has responded by suggesting that high prices could ultimately benefit American energy producers. Let's bring in our guest, Nuno Wanon Martins, political analyst, joining us from Lisbon, Portugal. Nuno, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important energy choke points. Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has said Tehran could use the Strait of Hormuz as an economic weapon. Now, given that roughly a fifth of global oil supplies pass through that waterway, how credible is that strategy?
Well, first and foremost, we have to look for something that nobody's talking about, which is regarding the new appointed Ayatollah, and to understand if he's still alive or not, because he has been addressing through other people, but nobody has seen him. And there were some rumors already in the beginning of this week that he has been wounded, and these rumors proved to be right because the regime said so 2 days later on. So the question is, we don't know if this is a reality or if it is just let's say, a tool that the regime is using to keep and to try to say that they maintain the line of the regime itself. But saying this, and departing from the beginning that the Ayatollah is alive and he's well, the question is, I do believe that this is a tentative of the regime to do whatever they can to destabilize the attack that happened 2 weeks ago from America and Israel towards the regime. So they don't have any other option, and this is the easiest option for them in order to create a fuss around the world against America and Israel. Is it credible? Well, it looks like so for now, because the prices have risen a little bit, not as much as the people who are criticizing the Trump administration would like. But the question is, how long the American administration will, let's say, support the war and having this threat coming and staying on the ground. So this is the big question that we have to lie in the future.
So let's continue the discussion, assuming that he's alive. Is this essentially a form of economic warfare?
I do believe so, because that's the only possibility that's right now the Iranians have, besides the fact that they can also attack the neighborhood countries, because it's clear that the destruction of the capability of the Iranian military forces is huge. Do not forget that it was already down in the beginning of the war from the 12th-day war from last year. So now it's even less than it was in the beginning of the war. So there is clearly a lack of capability from the Iranian forces. So the only way that they see they can try to counterattack is to do the economic warfare. Also, because we have to understand that the attack in Lebanon against Hezbollah, and you don't see also another proxy of Iran attacking, which are the Houthis in Yemen, makes the case that the proxies of Iran are not doing the job they were supposed to be doing in this time of the moment of this time of the war.
Khamenei also said Iran intends to obtain compensation from the enemy through assets or destruction. How do you interpret that statement?
This is a kind of European talk narrative like this, because this is exactly what was said about the war in Ukraine as well. And this is in fact, it's a narrative that tries to put the guilt on the attacks from America and from Israel and putting them responsible for what they did and for the destruction and to pay for that responsibility. What they are trying to do is to say that at the end of the day, Europe accuses Russia of attacking Ukraine. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying that the narrative is very similar, trying to put the responsibility on Russia to pay every damage that they created in Ukraine. So the Iranians are trying to use the same narrative for America and Israel and to create a future responsibility to, let's say, reconstruct the country. But I do believe this is just to play narrative propaganda, nothing else.
And President Trump responded by saying that when oil prices rise, the US makes a lot of money. Does that signal confidence that the US could withstand economic pressure from Iran?
That's a very interesting question because, in theory, no. Saying that the prices will basically create a problem to the American taxpayer. And this can also have consequences to the elections in November, the midterm elections. However, I do believe, and also because the prices of oil, of gas, they are the same everywhere, but because of the reserves that America has, I could believe that they could play on this because they could sell the gas to Europe. In fact, to be honest, I think that the countries which are more damaged with the situation are the European countries who we have to rely on buying natural gas, and we are buying parts of it from Qatar, for instance, which are basically blocked on the Strait of Hormuz, and we're trying to buy also from the US because once we stop buying the cheap gas coming from Russia, the problem relies on we have to buy gas anyways, first and foremost, the price is increased, and with this situation, the price will increase even more. So the real damage here is for Europe, I do believe, in the medium long term.
And could this become a strategic contest over who benefits more from higher energy prices?
I don't think so, because I just think it's also narrative propaganda in the sense that, or narrative war, in the sense that President Trump is using that to calm a little bit the markets, to calm the American population, and also to say that as a way of response to the Iranian threat, saying that the Iranians are attacking and are trying to make this economic warfare, but at the end of the day, what they are doing is they are benefiting us. I don't think it's just more than that at this time of the war. What is important to see, and it's important to have on the ground, is that the war will end in terms of the Americanized to victory to the US and to Israel, because the more the war prolongs, the more it will be difficult to continue sustaining the war itself.
If Iran were to disrupt traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, what would likely be the military response from the US and its allies?
Well, that's a very specific question. It's a very interesting question. I do believe that what we haven't seen yet, to be honest, is all the neighborhood countries that have been attacked by Iran. And let's face it, Iran has attacked, for instance, the Emirates heavily, and they haven't attacked the Emirates only, or Qatar only, because they have American bases, or Kuwait in the case of Kuwait and Qatar. But the question is, some views say that they are attacking these countries because they have an alliance with the US. We do not see the response. Either we don't see the response because they cannot, which I don't believe, or we don't see the response because they don't want basically to create a bigger conflict in the region. But the question is that there will be a moment where somehow there will have to be a response against this. And that specific way of controlling the Hormuz Strait by the Iranian forces has to be counterbalanced, either by the American forces, either by a coalition against this. What they are going to do exactly, I don't know, but I do believe that they will try basically to probably to have a small invasion on the ground in order to control that specific passage.
Will we see the conflict increasingly shift toward maritime confrontation, or will it run parallel to air raids and then, like you said, to a ground offensive as well?
No, absolutely it will be in parallel, because the question is also the types of weaponry that people are using. Of course, that the weaponry that both Israel and the US are using in Iran is quite developed, and some of them, or even for defense, they are quite being used for the first time, some of them. It will be important because of the reality of the defense capabilities of the Iranian regime that they have to destroy, and the way they are also safe. It's very difficult to penetrate in certain regions to get basically to destroy it. But of course that also the Iranians are using drones as a weapon to counterfight the war, and this is completely new also for the region. So the question is exactly that. In order to create and to end this so-called blockade, the Americans will need to not only maritime, they have to do a little bit more than that. Or they destroy clearly the forces on the ground, by all means, either they have to do a different solution. But the question is, whenever the Iranians can make pressure on keeping the Hormuz Strait blocked by themselves, this is something that the American military has to decide how to counter-defeat this.
Okay, what would even a temporary disruption in the Strait of Hormuz mean for global energy markets, and how are major oil importing regions such as Europe and Asia likely viewing this threat?
We have seen that already, the rising of prices, not as much as I said before, as some people would expect. But the question is also, you have two things. First and foremost, there are some, if I'm not mistaken, OPEP is already taking measures to counteract to this situation on one hand. On the other hand, many countries are opening the reserves of oil, but also I do believe that both OPEP and the Americans are trying to create solutions for this specific What is important is that this specific, some people talk about, for instance, to replace the Hormuz Strait by inland transportation. I don't know if it's feasible or not, and I don't know if, even if it's feasible, how long it will take. The question is exactly the rise of prices and the capability of implementing solutions and how fast you can implement those solutions to replace this particular situation. So the only visible thing, in my view, to have what you just asked is basically to end this war as soon as possible, and with a view that the war will be ending in positive for the Americans and the Israelis, and potentially to have the regime completely tackled.
Now, my last question to you, Nuno, could the Strait of Hormuz become a central pressure point in this conflict moving forward? And are we going to see the US and Israel revisit their strategy here?
I do believe that if as we have been discussing, I think so, if the situation continues as it is. I think so because the war is not only about the capabilities, the war is much more than that, it's also about narrative. And there is a narrative that's implementing, creating this idea that you will have a global energetical crisis because of the blockade of the Hormuz Strait. And this is not possible, and this is not positive for the American administration, especially in the, let's say, in the medium term, not in the short term, and in the medium term. But I have to say that maybe what is going on with this, some people claim that this is benefiting the Russian assets because of its increasing the price. Yes, in the short term, but I don't think it will be in the medium long term. But this is also creating a problem to China, because China is also getting some Iranian oil. And I do believe, more and foremost, that the Americans can have a response to this, and they will find a solution to create, and not to have the blockade of the Hormuz Strait to be much more influential than it has been already.
Okay, Nuno, thank you so much for joining us on the program. We appreciate your analysis.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Now, let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Authorities in Turkey say sirens were heard overnight at the Incirlik Air Base in the country's south. prompting speculation on social media about a possible missile incident. The episode comes amid heightened regional tensions following recent missile interceptions over Turkish airspace. According to the latest information, Turkish Defence Ministry confirmed in a statement that NATO defences intercepted a third missile from Iran and asked Tehran to clarify. Here are the details.
Sirens were heard early Friday morning at Turkey's Incirlik Air Base in the southern province of Adana, according to reports by Turkish state media. The base hosts Turkish forces along with a contingent of American military personnel. Shortly after the sirens were reported, videos began circulating on social media that appeared to show a missile being shot down over Adana. However, local media has since described the footage as fake, saying there has been no confirmed missile activity in the area. The reports come at a time of heightened security concerns in Turkey. Earlier this week, NATO air defense systems intercepted a second ballistic missile that entered Turkish airspace within the span of several days. Following the latest interception, Turkey's defense ministry announced the deployment of a Patriot air defense system in the southern Malatya province as part of NATO's integrated air defense network. Iran, for its part, has denied responsibility for any missile launches toward Turkey, a core NATO member. In a statement released Thursday, the Turkish Defense Ministry emphasized that Incirlik is a Turkish-owned and operated military installation. It stressed that the base belongs to the Republic of Turkey and hosts Turkish F-16 fighter jets, tanker aircraft, and unmanned aerial vehicles. The ministry added that the presence of American troops at Incirlik does not mean it is an American military installation or base. Spanish, Polish, and Qatari military personnel are also stationed there as part of Allied deployments, the ministry said. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Greece has evacuated its embassy staff from Iran through the Astara border into Azerbaijan amid rising security concerns. For more on this, here's Ruqayya Bashamak reporting from Astara.
As of the latest updates, around 7 staff members of the Greek embassy in Iran and a dozen other nationals were also evacuated on Thursday through the Astara border checkpoint. Several people are still crossing as evacuation operations continue. For now, it has been more than 2 weeks since the evacuation process started, with more than 2,000 foreign nationals having passed through till now. Still, the largest number of travelers passing through this point so far comes from China, followed by Russia and then Tajikistan, while the rest come from a range of other countries across Asia, Europe, and beyond. Azerbaijani authorities say they continue to facilitate the humanitarian transit of foreign nationals, providing them with logistical support and coordination at the border as evacuation efforts move forward. Reporting from Astara, this is Ruqayya Bashamak from A News.
Protests have erupted outside the government building in Yerevan ahead of a court hearing that could decide whether the arrest of Armenian businessman Samvel Karapetyan is extended. Karapetyan was detained in June last year after making public calls for a coup attempt. A court later ordered that he remain under house arrest. Despite the restrictions, the newly formed Strong Armenia Party has nominated him as its candidate for Prime Minister in upcoming elections. International leaders and experts are continuing discussions in Azerbaijan's capital, focusing on climate diplomacy, trade links across Eurasia, and China's role in global governance. Our Aytan Shukurova has more.
The second day of the 13th Global Baku Forum continues in Baku with a series of high-level discussions examining global governance, climate diplomacy, regional connectivity and sustainable development. One of the morning sessions focused on China and global governance initiatives, bringing together former European leaders, diplomats and economic experts. Discussions centered on China's growing role in shaping global governance frameworks and its impact on international economic and political cooperation.
So what is defining Baku Global Forum is dialogue, democratic atmosphere, free speaking, sharing experiences and visions. So vision and commitment to all these values of peace, stability and cooperation are the very foundation foundations of this initiative.
Our world is challenging since the Second World War. What we are living is scaring, and we are here to say loudly that let's come back to diplomacy, dialogue, human rights, rule of law, and this is what matters to maintain human dignity.
Later in the morning, the forum turned to climate diplomacy with a panel titled Beyond Negotiations, the Battle to Keep COP Alive. The discussion brought together leaders of several UN climate conferences, including COP29 President Muhtar Babayev and COP31 President designate Murat Kurum, Turkey's Minister of Environment.
The situation we are experiencing today, the crisis we are facing, is largely caused by energy issues. At the same time, around 70% of the problem that climate change is trying to address is energy-related. When you consider that 70% of our emissions come from energy, it becomes clear that every country needs to implement an energy policy that can sustain itself. In this regard, of course, each country has its own characteristics, but we attach great importance to renewable energy. We will take steps related to renewable energy.
Participants addressed the future of international climate negotiations and ways to strengthen international cooperation on sustainable development. Another key discussion focused on the Middle Corridor and Eurasian connectivity, examining transport and trade routes linking Asia and Europe. During the afternoon sessions, participants also examined Africa's development outlook with speakers including former European Council President Charles Michel and former Maltese Prime Minister Joseph Muscat.
So I think what we need in the international community is peace, stability, human rights, and the rule of law. So those are the key issues even within the Charter. But otherwise, as the judge, president of the East African Court of Justice, we are also interested in those principles, which are also the principles which govern our community. So I think what we say is that the international community should be a peaceful community.
I think that multilateralism is essential for humanitarian action. But we need to learn, and that's part of the reform that is being proposed, we need to learn how to partner with local partners, with local organizations that have capacities, that know their thing, that know their country, that know what is happening on the ground.
The day will conclude with discussions on accelerating the United Nations 2030 agenda, focusing on inclusive economic growth. Ayten Şükürova, Natik Mehmedov, İlkin Mehdiyev, A-News.
A moderately strong earthquake struck central Turkey on Friday morning, according to the European Mediterranean Seismological Centre. The shake measured 5.5 in magnitude, was centred in the town of Niksar in Tokat province, sending frightened residents into the streets, some finding shelter in their cars, afraid to return home. Turkey's disaster response agency says no damage has been reported. In 2023, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake killed more than 53,000 people in Turkey and destroyed or damaged hundreds of thousands of buildings in 11 southern and southeastern provinces. Turkey intensifies diplomatic efforts to prevent Iran-centred violence. The Atatürk International Peace Prize was presented to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, highlighting Turkey's cooperation with the UN on a number of issues.
Turkey President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said on Thursday that Turkey is working hard to stop Iran-centred violence from spreading. He called diplomacy and dialogue the safest way to achieve lasting peace. Erdogan made the remarks while giving the Atatürk International Peace Prize to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres in Ankara.
Türkiye olarak biz de coğrafyamızı
As Turkey, we are conducting intensive diplomatic efforts to prevent the Iran-centred spiral of violence, which risks dragging our region into total disaster, from expanding. US, Israel, Iran diplomatic activity. Despite those seeking to crush hopes, and make us abandon our struggle, we will continue to work with patience and determination. As a leader who believes that development, peace and stability are impossible without justice, we will continue to support initiatives to make the UN a more inclusive institution.
Sayın Genel Sekreterin, çağımızın en büyük mezalimlerinden
Erdogan said Turkey is ready to implement the UN House project in Istanbul, bringing UN officers together and contributing to the UN 80 initiative. He stressed that peace, development and stability are not possible without justice. The ceremony ended with Erdogan presenting the Ataturk International Peace Prize to Guterres, followed by a visit to the exhibition Gazan Youth Resisting Pain with Hope.
I've seen Turkey's global leadership in championing zero waste initiatives, and I commend the First Lady's efforts along with preparations to host the COP31 UN Climate Conference later this year.
Erdogan highlighted Turkey's UN work, including the Black Sea Grain Initiative to prevent a global food crisis and efforts to restore peace in Ukraine. He praised Guterres' stance on Gaza, thanked the UN for earthquake support and noted cooperation on climate projects like the Zero Waste Project and the upcoming COP31 in Istanbul. Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary-General, said the horrific attack on October 7th cannot be justified, noting that ongoing investigations and forthcoming reports aim to clarify the situation.
Kazakhstan is seeing a steady rise in investment activity, with billions of dollars flowing into the economy over the past year. Officials say both domestic and foreign investment are increasing, supported by new economic policies and industrial projects. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
Kazakhstan is seeing a noticeable increase in investment activity. Total investment in the country's economy reached about $46 billion last year, roughly 13% more than the year before. The strongest growth has been seen in the financial and insurance sectors. Foreign capital is also contributing to this momentum. In the first 9 months of last year, Kazakhstan attracted nearly $15 billion in foreign direct investment, an increase of about 11% compared with the same period a year earlier. The government says improving the investment climate remains a priority. A new investment policy concept has been introduced, setting the strategy through 2030. The focus is on attracting funding into competitive industries with higher added value and expanding sectors beyond natural resources. Kazakhstan is also continuing to use a three-level system to attract investors, working with partners internationally at the national level and across the regions. And according to the Eurasian Development Bank, Kazakhstan is now among the leaders in the Eurasian Economic Union when it comes to attracting foreign direct investment. The country accounted for nearly $1 billion in additional inflows, more than a third of the overall increase across the region. Analysts say much of this momentum is linked to new industrial projects, which are helping Kazakhstan strengthen its position as one of the region's emerging investment hubs. Fariza Kalimursina, Almaty, A News.
After the break, we turn to developments in the South Caucasus, where Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev has highlighted his country's growing role in Europe's energy security during remarks at the Baku Global Forum. Welcome back to A News. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev has highlighted his country's role as a reliable energy partner for Europe, speaking at the Baku Global Forum. Aliyev said energy security has become increasingly fragile in the current geopolitical climate, but emphasized that Azerbaijan has increased its gas exports from 12 to 16 countries. He also highlighted the importance of regional connectivity and infrastructure projects linking the South Caucasus to Europe. Let's bring in our guest now. Mr. Vasif Huseynov joins us, Head of Department at the Center for Analysis of International Relations from Baku, Azerbaijan. Mr. Huseynov, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, speaking at the Baku Global Forum, President Ilham Aliyev said energy security has become increasingly fragile globally, but emphasized that Azerbaijan remains a reliable partner. How significant is that message for European policymakers right now?
You know, considering current uncertainty in global energy environment, the significance of this message is obviously very high, particularly for Europe. Many countries are now suffering from rising oil and gas prices. And amidst this uncertainty, Azerbaijan appears as a reliable supplier, reliable partner that has already confirmed its reliability over the past several decades in oil supplies to Europe, as well as since 2020 in gas supplies. And right now, due to the situation in Middle East, the importance of Azerbaijan's supply for Europe has increased even more. And therefore, the messages given by President Ilham Aliyev at the Baku Global Forum was very important for Europe, and also to hear that Azerbaijan remains committed to its principles, and also the promises that have been made by the Azerbaijan side about increasing gas supplies are going to be maintained.
And is Azerbaijan now positioning itself as one of the key alternatives for Europe as it continues to diversify its energy sources?
Yeah, absolutely. Azerbaijan has already started producing and exporting natural gas to Europe in late 2020. And since that time, the amount of natural gas has increased very rapidly. And last year, it reached 13 BCM. And in early January this year, Azerbaijan increased the network of its gas supplies in Europe by exporting natural gas to Austria and Germany as well. So with these two countries added, Azerbaijan currently exports natural gas to 12 countries in Europe out of 16 countries that Azerbaijan exports natural gas. And President Aliyev proudly mentioned that Azerbaijan is the country with largest oil network, particularly with land pipelines. And that's very important achievement for Azerbaijan. And it's, as I said, particularly important for Europe at the moment, given the fact that traditional suppliers in Europe, particularly Russia, is not in the position anymore to supply natural gas to Europe. And the situation in Middle East is also getting more and more complicated. Some countries in Middle East have been providing Europe with LNG supplies, and now there have been significant decline in these supplies as well. So therefore, taking together all of this, Azerbaijan is appearing a very critical alternative of natural gas supplier for Europe, and European countries have appreciated this. And recently, European Council President has been in Baku, and in his meetings with President Aliyev, he tried to assure the Azerbaijani side that Europe is going to keep its commitments. Particularly, it's very important. Why? Because Europe, on the one hand, expects Azerbaijan to increase its gas supplies. On the other hand, Baku made it clear that in order to increase gas supplies to Europe, we need more investments. And this investment should come from the countries that are interested in Azerbaijan's natural gas exports. So therefore, there are these sort of issues at the moment to be discussed between Azerbaijan and European Union. But one thing is clear, that Azerbaijan's importance for European energy market, European energy security is growing day by day.
And President Aliyev also linked energy security to broader geopolitical stability. How closely are those two issues connected today?
Yeah, these two issues are, of course, interlinked. As the geopolitical stability deteriorated in Middle East, it immediately affected the situation in global energy market. And on the one hand, it increased the price of energy, which is good news for exporting countries. But President Aliyev made it clear that Azerbaijan is more interested in predictability, in stable energy prices, not volatile prices, which negatively affect Azerbaijan's economy, its economic prospects as well. That's why the situation that's now going on in the Middle East in terms of instability, security threats, and etc. It's affecting global energy market in a very negative way. And President Aliyev, during his speech at Baku Global Forum, made it clear that Azerbaijan is not a beneficiary of this situation. Azerbaijan is interested in geopolitical stability. Azerbaijan is interested in stability in oil and gas prices as well.
Mr. Vasif Husseinov, it's always a pleasure having you on A News. Thank you for your analysis today.
Thank you.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more updates, and thank you for watching.